What's up, everyone? My name is Ethan. This is Courtside TV. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe, and let's get into it. So today I wanted to just do a quick little check-in on the New York Knicks, see how they're doing, see what's been going on, because this is a team that, early on in the year was pretty surprising how well they were playing. And at this point, I think they're a playoff team in the Eastern Conference. I think that's pretty much, they should be definitely considered in the same tier as a lot of these other teams out east. Standings are really close right now, so I kind of want to just take a look in at the Knicks, see, how the rest of the year might go for them, what they have to do in order to try to get into the playoffs, and what their plan should be for the rest of the season. So here's a quick little snapshot of the Eastern Conference. As you can see, the Knicks are currently in the 8th spot. They're pretty much tied with the Hornets. The Hornets have played 2 less games than them. So they technically would have the tiebreaker, I guess, but they're basically tied for the 7th spot with the Hornets. So they're right there. They're 2 games up on the Pacers for 9th, and then they're only a half game back of the Heat for that number 6 spot. So it's really close. 1 game back of the Celtics, only 2 of the Hawks for number 4. So this big group of teams here, specifically 4 through 8, but you can even extend it down to the Pacers, they're all really bunched up here, and those teams are going to be jockeying for whatever those positions end up being. Now, as we know, you have to be the 6th seed to avoid the play-in tournament, right? And that's going to be a big motivating factor for a lot of these squads, I'm sure. Just to be able to avoid that play-in tournament, secure your playoff berth and really be able to get in. And even going up to the 4 or 5 is going to be a big incentive, because whoever is 6, 7, or 8 is going to have to go up against either the Sixers, the Bucks, or the Nets. And those 3 are pretty clearly the best teams in the conference. So if you end up with 4 or 5, you get to play one of these other teams, and you'll give yourself a better chance of advancing out of round 1. So for the Knicks and for all these other teams here, that should be the goal, is try to get up to at least number 5, and go from there. So it seems pretty assured that the Knicks are going to at least get one of those play-in spots, even if they drop all the way down to 10. They have a comfortable lead on the Bulls right now. It's 5 games, and Chicago has not been playing super well, so it's looking pretty likely that they're going to be able to hold at least, 8 or 9. Maybe the Pacers end up passing them, who knows, right? But let's just say, in a disaster scenario, they start to really fall apart and play badly down the stretch. That would be, I think they would still be in a good position to make the playoffs, because, even if you get down and the Bulls somehow pass you, the Raptors and the Wizards are next after that, and they're not pictured here, but they're 2 games below the Bulls. Both of them are 2 games behind Chicago. So even if Toronto or the Wizards were to make a run, the Knicks have, a 7-game lead on both of them. So it's unlikely that they fall out of the playoff picture entirely, and that is good news, because playoff basketball back in New York is going to be definitely exciting. So in terms of what the rest of the schedule looks like for them, it's nothing too crazy. Looks honestly pretty easy, maybe about average in compared to the rest of the teams. But they have 2 games against the Suns left. They have a trip to LA to play the Lakers and the Clippers. They do actually have a couple of games against teams that are right next to them in the standings. They play the Hornets twice more. They have another game against the Hawks. They play the Celtics for the last game of the year. Their last 2 games are actually versus Charlotte and versus Boston, both at home, but that's a back-to-back to end the season. So that, assuming that things stay tight, that could potentially be a big stretch for them in terms of seeding, because they could, potentially end up passing both of those teams those last 2 games of the year if things are still really close like the way they are right now. So it's been a while since we've checked in with this team, and I kind of wanted to just give a progress report on how things are going with them. They've been playing pretty good basketball recently. They've been sort of an up and down team. They go through hot stretches and cold stretches, but never lose or win too many in a row. It's kind of up and down basketball. They're about 500, which makes sense considering how they've played all year. But even that is a big accomplishment for where a lot of people, including myself, thought this team was going to be. Most people had them pegged as a bottom 3 team in the Eastern Conference and a bottom 5 team in the league overall, and that just has not been the case. They've been winning, and it's been attributed to a lot of things, right? They have a really good defense. Tom Thibodeau is known as a good defensive coach, and he has these guys buying in and playing hard on defense. While they don't necessarily have a ton of great defensive personnel, they've made it work, and guys are buying in and buying into their roles and playing hard, and that's got them winning games. The offense is not great. It's a very slow pace, and they don't score a lot, so they're mainly winning on defense. But offensively, it's especially Julius Randle has just been incredible this year. Has made the All-Star team and really raised the perception of him around the league, because a lot of people really viewed him as a guy who is honestly getting overpaid, and he's only making around $20, $22, $23 million a year, something like that. And it felt like that was kind of an overpay for him because he wasn't playing super well last year. And, I had even suggested that they might end up buying him out around the deadline this year, considering that I thought they were going to be bad and he might want to be somewhere else. But instead, he made the All-Star team. So, it's a big turn of events for Julius Randle, and he has really raised his perception around the NBA. He's putting up triple-doubles. He's scoring 30 points. He's doing everything efficiently, has really stepped up his playmaking this year, and is definitely deserving of making that All-Star team, and is somebody that I think the Knicks are going to want to keep around for the long term. Now, whether he's worth a max contract, I'm not sure. Not quite time for that yet. But he's really, really good, and the Knicks are lucky to have him. And listen, I've seen it suggested for not just New York, but some of these other, like borderline playoff teams, guys who are fighting for the play-in but might not end up getting there. And it's more for teams that are a little bit below the Knicks in the standings, but they're kind of lumped into this group too, where it might actually be more advantageous for them, not necessarily to tank, but it just might be better if they ended up getting like the 9th or 10th or 11th best lottery odds rather than making the playoffs, just because you have that decent chance to jump into the top 4 given the flattened lottery odds work, and we've seen that happen a couple times over the past few years. So maybe adding another really high level prospect to this group would be better for them long term, and I fundamentally disagree with that idea specifically for this team. I think there's a couple of other teams where it makes sense for them to do that. I think specifically like a team like the Raptors, I think that makes sense for them to consider. Maybe even the Bulls potentially, even though they don't have their own pick, so that's kind of a different scenario. But I think the Knicks are a team that is so desperate to make the playoffs and have good basketball, and I think the way that this team is going to build itself has to be similar to what the Lakers did a few years ago, where they built a nice young core, right? They had drafted at the top of the lottery for a couple of years in a row, built a nice young core with D'Angelo Russell, Brandon Ingram, Lonzo Ball, and got a couple of young guys in there, and they were like, okay, like this is our group, this is what we're going to go with. But then they were able to, trade some of those guys away to maybe open up some cap space, and then they were end up signing LeBron James in free agency because he wanted to come to a big market, and then they traded away the rest of those young pieces for a star player like Anthony Davis. If you're in a big market, you have this advantage where you don't have to build through the draft. A team like the Grizzlies or the Jazz or the Magic, a lot of these smaller teams, their only way to contention is building through the draft and hitting on draft picks and just, building your team up that way and hopefully convincing the guys that you draft to stay around, right? The Knicks and the Lakers and the Clippers and the Warriors and the Bulls, all these teams that are in big markets have the luxury of being able to sign big free agents, assuming that you exhibit this, competent free agent moves, right? Competent front office moves. And so the Knicks have not been able to do that in recent years, right? But if they make the playoffs this year and put themselves back on the right track, they've had a couple of good draft picks in the past few years and have done good in free agency, and it seemed like they have a coach that knows what he's doing. So they have exhibited some competency. So while maybe, a couple of years ago, Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant spurned them for the Nets across town, maybe next time it'll be different. And, we wouldn't have said that because it's kind of a joke where the Knicks always miss out on free agents. But I think that they are well on their way to proving that they are an actual destination for players. So making the playoffs this year and potentially getting somebody in free agency and then using your young pieces to trade for another star, maybe not all of them, and maybe one of them develops into that second star. But that's, I think, the way that they're going to want to build this team, and they have the luxury of being able to do that where other teams might not necessarily be able to. So in any case, my opinion is that it's much better for the Knicks this year to make the playoffs than any potential lottery pick, and they're well on the way to doing that. And other than that, Julius Randle, I talked about him. They have some other nice young players. RJ Barrett has really come around his second year. He looks like, the guy that was drafted 3rd overall. He had a kind of a rough rookie season, but this year he has really come a long way, especially his shooting numbers, I think, have been really great, especially recently, as well as Emmanuel Quickley being a really solid rookie. Obi Toppin hasn't really had a chance to do much yet. Mitchell Robinson's been hurt, so it's not all all good. But specifically with Quickly and Barrett, I think both of those guys have proven that they're going to probably be guys who stick around long term. And like I said, maybe if eventually down the line you want to package those guys for a superstar, maybe that's a move that you do. But for right now, they've got a nice young core. They're going to have some cap space, and they've put themselves on the right track, put their best foot forward from an organizational perspective, and are finally, it appears, on the track back to relevancy. So yeah, I think that's about all I have on the New York Knicks. Like I said at the top of the video, if you're new, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, ring the bell if you want to. Leave a comment letting me know what you guys think about the Knicks and their season and how it's gone so far. Would love to hear your thoughts. And by the way, this is actually not a Knicks jersey. This is Toon Squad. This is like a black Space Jam one. And I didn't even realize that I was wearing this specifically today and that it looks like a Knicks jersey from this point up because it's got the orange and the white and blue. So we'll just call that a happy coincidence that I'm wearing a Knicks jersey from the neck up. Yeah, that's about all I have for today. So I'll see you guys in the next one.